I helped my ex-wife's dad repair his fence on a Saturday morning in September, and by 4 o'clock that afternoon, standing over the first post I'd set in his wife's dead garden, he wiped his hands on his jeans and said, "There's someone I want you to meet. My name is Wes Dunmire. I build fences for a living. My father built them and his father built them, and there's a stretch of highway outside Cades Bend where you can drive 4 miles and see 3 generations of Dunmire posts leaning at the exact same stubborn angle." I'd been divorced from his daughter for 3 years. Arliss Ketch was 74. Vietnam, then 31 years climbing power poles in ice. A widower on 11 acres, with one lung working on borrowed enthusiasm and a back fence that had gone to hell. He could have called anybody in that county to repair it. But he called me, the ex-son-in-law, the man his daughter left. And when I told him no, that she was his daughter, that this wasn't my place anymore, he set his coffee cup down on the porch rail and said, "Next Saturday, Wes, 10 o'clock. Bring the good post-hole digger." Then he went inside, because that's how Arliss Ketch ended a conversation. I sat at the end of his gravel drive for 11 minutes that next Saturday, before I could make myself drive up. There was a green Corolla parked by his barn, a nursing sign on the door, and a woman on her knees in the dirt at the end of that fence line, fighting blackberry canes with her bare hands, who looked up at me and said, before I'd even told her my name, "He's told me about you for 2 years. 2 years? So why does a man call his ex-son-in-law to repair a fence he never intended to finish? Who was the woman he'd been talking about since before I ever knew she existed? And what was in that sideboard drawer, the letter he made me swear not to open until after he was gone? Let me back up, because to understand what that old man did to me, you have to understand what he'd already survived. The phone rang on a Tuesday. I was under a truck with grease on my knuckles, and I saw the name on the screen and my whole chest went tight. Arliss, 3 years divorced, and that name still hit me like a hand on the back of the neck. "Now don't make this weird," he said. "Wasn't planning on it. Good. Because my back fence has gone to hell and I'm not paying some kid from Asheville $4,000 to do what my son-in-law does for a living." Ex-son-in-law. Don't split hairs at me, Wesley. I'm 74. That was Arliss Ketch. 60 seconds of conversation and he'd already moved the furniture in your head. Here's what you need to know about how I lost his daughter. Camille and I were married 9 years. We lost a baby at 22 weeks. A boy. We had a name picked out and I still don't say it out loud. Not to friends, not to my own mother, not in the truck alone at 2 in the morning with the radio off. Camille went quiet after. Not angry, quiet. 11 months of a woman moving through her own house like a guest. And somewhere inside that quiet, she found somebody who could make her laugh again. And I found a shop light, a radio, and a whole lot of overtime. Neither of us was the villain. That's the part nobody warns you about. You want somebody to blame so bad your teeth ache, and there's nobody there. Sometimes 2 decent people just run out of road. We share a daughter, Junie. She was 6 when it happened. She's 9 now, and she's got her mother's chin and my complete inability to let a thing go. And Arliss never let me go. Not once. Not when Camille moved up to the house on Bell Ridge with Grant, who is, irritatingly, a perfectly nice man. Not when the papers came. Not when half that town decided which side of the fence they were standing on. He just kept calling. Every few weeks, 3 years running. Weather, trucks, the Braves bullpen, which he took as a personal insult from God. He never once asked me about the divorce. I used to think that was kindness. I got out to his place that first Saturday morning, with a load of black locust in the bed, and the smell of cut cedar riding in the cab with me. The house sat on 11 acres his wife Bernice had loved, and he had merely tolerated, right up until the day she died, at which point he became its most devoted servant. The back fence wrapped her garden, half an acre of raised beds gone to seed, blackberry canes eating the corners like something hungry, and a crooked line of pickets that had last been white in 1988. I walked the line slow, the way my father taught me. Boot heel against every post, 1 push. 42 posts, 31 rotted clean through at ground level, 3 sections flat on their backs in the wet grass, 2 more thinking hard about it. I came back up to the porch and pulled my cap off. "Arliss, this isn't a repair. This is a resurrection." He was standing there with 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one without asking how I took it. Because he already knew. And he'd known for 12 years, and he'd never once forgotten. Then we better get started, he said. 74 years old. He carried maybe 4 boards that entire day. But he stood out there the whole time, hands in his pockets, cap pulled low, telling me exactly where the old fence had gone wrong back in '79, and precisely which of his neighbors had been drinking when they said it. I watched him breathe. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I watched him breathe, and something in me went cold, and I told myself it was the cigarettes he quit in 1996. Because here's what Arliss Ketch was. 31 years a lineman, climbing poles in ice storms while the rest of the county sat in the dark waiting on him. Hands scarred across every knuckle, a man who fixed the world for other people and never once asked the world to fix anything back. And before that, before all of it, he was 19 years old in the Ia Drang Valley. He never talked about it, ever, except the way certain men do, which is sideways. He couldn't stand a doorway at his back. He ate fast and then apologized for eating fast. And when a plane came in low over the ridge, his eyes tracked it the whole way across the sky, without his head ever moving. Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, I set the first new corner post, tamped it, checked it plumb, stood back. Arliss looked at that post for a long, long moment. Bernice would have cried, he said. It's a post, Arliss. She'd have cried anyway. She was a crier. And then, in the exact same tone, same voice, same breath, like he was still talking about lumber. There's someone I want you to meet. I straightened up, sweat running into my eyes. Arliss, next Saturday. Arliss, I'm not. That's your daughter. Camille's your... I know whose daughter she is. He set his cup on the rail. I was there. Then you know why I can't. Next Saturday, Wes. 10 o'clock? Bring the good post-hole digger. And he walked inside and shut the door. I stood in that dead garden with a level in my hand, and my heart going like a hammer, and I did not understand one single thing that had just happened to me. I almost didn't go back. I want to be honest about that. I sat in my truck at the end of his gravel drive the following Saturday for 11 minutes. And I know it was 11 because I watched the clock do every one of them. Everything in me said, turn around. You are the ex-husband. You are the leftover. You do not get to keep this family, and every Saturday you spend on that land is a Saturday you're pretending you still belong to something that already let you go. Then I thought about an old man standing on a porch with 2 cups of coffee, and one of them was mine, and he'd never had to ask. I drove up. There was a green Corolla parked crooked by the barn. Magnetic sign on the driver's door. Blue Ridge Respite. In-home nursing. I read it twice. Nursing. I got out of the truck slow, and that's when I saw her. A woman down on her knees in the dirt at the far end of the fence line, wrestling a blackberry cane out of the ground with her bare hands, and losing badly. Dark hair coming loose out of its braid. A red scratch down one forearm. Boots caked to the ankle. She looked up at me with an expression of such complete, unembarrassed exasperation that I laughed out loud before I could stop myself. These have teeth, she said. They do. He told me you'd bring gloves. He tells a lot of people a lot of things. She got up, wiped her palm down her jeans, and stuck her hand out. Her grip was warm and rough, and she didn't hold back on it. Odie Fairbank. Wes Dunmire. I know. And she held that handshake half a second longer than a stranger ever would. He's told me about you for 2 years. The wind moved through the dead garden. 2 years, I said. Give or take. She glanced back toward the house. Then something crossed her face, and her voice changed, dropped, softened, went careful. He didn't tell you what I do here, did he? He said the fence needed fixing. She looked at me then, and it wasn't pity. It was worse than pity. It was that gentle, terrible kindness that people in her line of work carry around like a set of keys. The look of somebody who has broken this exact piece of news 100 times and has never once gotten used to it. Wes, she said, I've been driving him to Asheville since March. Every 3 weeks. For what? Pulmonary function tests. The post-hole digger was still in my hand. I remember that. I remember the weight of it, and the smell of wet clay, and a crow going off somewhere out past the tree line. How bad? I said. And she said quietly, that's not mine to tell you. Which is how I knew. I found him in the kitchen with his back to me. running water into the sink like a man who had nothing on his mind but dishes. Arliss, don't start. How long? It's a lung thing. He didn't turn around. Everybody's got lungs. Now are we working, or are we having a feeling summit? Arliss. He shut the water off, and for a second, 1 second, his shoulders came down, and he looked exactly as old as he was. Then he turned around and put both hands flat on that counter. Big hands, 40 years of ice and copper, written across every knuckle. Pulmonary fibrosis, he said, scarring in the lungs. It doesn't go backward. It only goes one direction, and it's already going. The kitchen clock ticked. Bernice's clock. Still on the same wall, 30-some years later. Does Camille know? Camille's got a wedding to plan. Does Camille know? No. He said it flat. No apology in it. And I'll tell her when I tell her. She's your daughter. She deserves. The second I tell her, he said, and his voice came up hard enough to stop me cold. She starts grieving. You understand me? The day I say those words out loud, I don't get my girl anymore. I get somebody sitting across a table watching me die. That's what she becomes. That's all I get for whatever's left. He breathed. I heard it catch. I'm not ready to hand that over yet. I stood there in that kitchen, and I couldn't say a word. You, though. He almost smiled. You, I can tell. Why me? Because you already know how to be around a hard thing and still fix a fence. He picked up a dish towel and dried his hands, one finger at a time, the way he did everything. 3 years ago, I watched you lose a son and a wife inside of 1 year, and still show up at that girl's school play, with your shirt tucked in. You didn't fall apart, and you didn't go cruel. You just kept getting up. He hung the towel on the oven door. Rare, he said, rarer than people think. And then, because he was Arliss Ketch, and he could not sit inside a moment like that for more than 4 seconds, now go help that woman with the blackberries, before she loses a finger. She's stubborn, and she's got no sense about her hands, and I need those hands. I stopped in the doorway. Arliss, why is she really here? He was already turning back to the sink. Fence isn't going to build itself, Wesley. Here's what I want you to understand about the next 6 weeks. That fence should have taken 9 days. 9. I have run bigger jobs than that in worse ground with half the daylight. It took 6 weeks. Because every Saturday, that green Corolla was in the drive. Every Saturday, there was some reason to stop at noon and eat lunch sitting on my tailgate with the sun coming through the bare trees. And every single Saturday, Arliss Ketch found a brand new stretch of that fence line that had gone off true and needed pulling out and doing over. He was buying us time, openly, clumsily, like a man trying to build a trap out of 2x4s while the animals stood there watching him do it. And God help me, it worked. Because Odie Fairbank was easy the way clean water is easy. She told me she'd started out wanting to be a large animal vet and quit in her 2nd year because she couldn't stop crying in the barn. She told me she ate cereal for dinner 4 nights a week and wasn't sorry. She told me she'd tried online dating exactly 1 time, and the man showed up with printed questions on a folded sheet of paper. And I told her about Junie, about the shop light and the overtime, about the boy we lost, which I had said out loud to maybe 4 people in my entire life, and I said it to her on a tailgate in October with a sandwich in my hand. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach for me. She just went still and let it be as heavy as it actually was, and I have never in my life been so grateful to somebody for not saying anything. 30 feet up that fence line, an old man kept his back to us and pretended very hard to inspect a post he had already inspected twice. And around week 4, I noticed the ring. It hung on a thin chain around her neck. A man's wedding band. She only pulled it out when she thought nobody was looking. I asked. She hooked it out with 1 finger and looked at it like it belonged to a stranger. Paul, she said. 4 years in May. I'm sorry. It was long. She turned the ring slowly around. Almost 3 years long. And everybody says I'm so sorry for your loss, and I say thank you. And what I never say, what I have never once said out loud to another human being. She stopped. The wind came across the dead garden and lifted a piece of hair off her face. You can say it, I said. And Odie Fairbank looked out at that half-built fence and told me the thing she'd been carrying for 4 years. I want you to hear what she said next, because it changed everything about how I saw her. And I want you to understand, I still had no idea, not the first clue. I didn't know that this woman kneeling in Bernice Ketch's ruined garden had a father she'd never met. I didn't know his name. I didn't know he'd died in the rain 51 years earlier with a man's 2 hands pressed against his chest. And I sure didn't know that the man was standing 30 feet away from us, watching, waiting, carrying a promise he'd been unable to keep since 1971. She said, "When it was over, I slept 11 hours. Her voice went flat. Careful. The way people talk when they've rehearsed a confession 1,000 times and never once had anywhere to put it. First time in 3 years, I slept through a night. And I woke up and the sun was coming through the blinds, and for about 4 seconds, she stopped. Her jaw moved. For about 4 seconds, I felt light. The wind moved through the dead garden. Before I remembered, she said. 4 seconds, Wes. That's all it was." She let the ring drop back against her chest. "And I have been paying for those 4 seconds every day since." I set my sandwich down on the tailgate. "Odie, don't. You didn't feel relief that he died." She wouldn't look at me. "You felt relief that it stopped," I said. "There's a difference. And it's the whole difference. And you've been standing on the wrong side of it for 4 years. She laughed, one broken wet sound, and wiped her face fast with the back of her wrist, like she was mad at it. "That's what my therapist says." "Then your therapist and I are both right, and you're outnumbered." She knocked her shoulder into mine, hard enough to spill my coffee, and neither one of us moved away after. We just sat there on that tailgate with the sun coming sideways through the bare trees, shoulder to shoulder, not talking. And it was the first time in 3 years I had felt anything close to still. And about 15 feet up the fence line, Arliss Ketch cleared his throat with all the subtlety of a freight train coming through a kitchen. "I brought Junie out on week 5. That wasn't the plan. Camille had something she couldn't move. The sitter fell through at 7 in the morning, and my 9-year-old climbed into my truck with a book about horses under her arm, and an agenda I did not see coming. She had Odie Fairbank's entire life story inside of 40 minutes. I'd look up from setting a post and there they'd be, down at the far corner, heads together, my daughter talking with both hands the way she does when she's decided somebody's worth it. Odie let her run the tamper, let her carry the string line, taught her the names of every one of Arliss's chickens, including the one that doesn't have a name, only a number, because Arliss ran out of patience in 2018. And when Junie asked why the blackberry canes were so mean, Odie said, without missing a beat, "Because they're structurally malicious." My daughter repeated that phrase the entire ride home, and for the next 6 months. At school, to her mother, to a dentist. That night, brushing her teeth, she said it around the toothbrush. "Dad, is Odie your friend or your friend?" "She's Grandpa Arliss's nurse." That's not what I asked. 9 years old. Foam on her chin. Her mother's exact chin. "Go to bed, Junebug." She went. But she stopped in the hall and turned around, and she had that look kids get when they've been holding something for a while. "Grandpa Arliss walks slow now," she said. I didn't answer. "He didn't used to walk slow." And she went to bed, and I stood in that hallway with a towel in my hands for a long, long time. Camille found out in the Food Lion parking lot. Of course she did. Everything in Cades Bend gets found out in a parking lot. Somebody's cousin sees something, and by supper the whole county's had a turn with it. She was loading bags into her trunk. I was coming out with a gallon of milk and nothing else, the way divorced men shop. She saw me, and stopped. "So," she said, "Odie." My chest went tight. "Cammy, my father." She set a bag down. "My father set you up. With his nurse." "Yes." "Did you know he was going to?" "No." "Did she?" "I don't think so." Camille stood there with one hand on the trunk lid, and I watched something move across her face that I had not seen in 3 years. It wasn't jealousy. I want to be fair to her. It was older and sadder than that. It was the look of a woman standing in the doorway of a house she used to live in, seeing all the furniture moved. "When we split," she said, "I told myself a story. That you'd be fine. That I was the one taking the risk and you'd be fine. And that's how I got through it." Her voice cracked straight down the middle. "And I need you to know that finding out you're actually happy is a really strange thing to survive on a Tuesday afternoon." You're getting married in April. I know that. You love him. I know that. She laughed, and it was an awful sound. And then it turned into something softer. She dragged her wrist across her eyes. Grant's better for me than you ever were. And that's not an insult, Wes. That's just geometry. A cart rattled past us. Somebody's radio went by, and I thought about the old man in that kitchen with his hands flat on the counter, saying I'm not ready to hand that over yet. And I made a choice. Cammy, don't. He's sick. She went absolutely still, one hand still on the trunk. Who is? Your dad. The bag in her hand hit the pavement. A can rolled under the car, and neither of us went after it. How sick? She said. You need to go ask him. Not me. Wes, go ask him. And Cammy, don't let him change the subject. He's going to change the subject. He's going to ask you about the Braves bullpen. She was already walking to her car. She spent the next month at that house. Every day. I'd come up the drive Saturday morning, and there'd be her car and Odie's car, and the smell of something cooking, and through the window I could hear them going at it. That hard, ugly, necessary kind of fighting that only happens between people who love each other past the point of politeness. Why didn't you tell me? Because of this. Because of exactly this. You don't get to decide what I can carry. I've been deciding what you can carry since 1986. Girl, why would I stop now? And then, somewhere around the third week, the fighting stopped, and she just started showing up with soup. That's how you know it's real. When a family stops arguing about a thing and starts feeding each other instead. I braced for the collision. I'll admit that. Camille and Odie, on those 11 acres, with me standing in the middle of it holding a level. What actually happened was this. I came up the drive on a Wednesday afternoon in November, and the two of them were sitting side by side on the porch steps, and Camille was laughing so hard she had to put her forehead down on her own knees. Odie saw me and lifted her coffee cup about an inch. Like a toast. Later, Camille stopped me by the truck. She's good, she said. Cammy, no. Listen to me. I have exactly one thing to say, and then I am never saying it again, as long as I live. She poked a finger into my chest. Hard. You were a good husband to a woman who could not be reached. That was not your failure. That was mine. And it was the baby's. And it was God's. And it was not yours. Her eyes were wet and furious. So don't you dare walk into this thing, thinking you're somebody's second choice. Are we clear? I couldn't speak. Are we clear, Wes? We're clear. Good. She got in her car, rolled the window down halfway. She's way out of your league, though. I know it. Just making sure you know it. He went into the hospital in Asheville on a Thursday. Odie called me from the parking deck. I heard the wind in the phone, and I heard her voice doing that thing where it's steady on the surface and shaking underneath. He's okay. He's stable, but Wes, a breath. It's faster than they thought. I drove 90 minutes with my hands at 10 and 2, and my jaw locked so tight my ears rang. He was propped up in that bed with a cannula in his nose, and he looked small, and I have never in my life been so unprepared for a thing I already knew was coming. 31 years climbing power poles in ice, and now a plastic tube and a chair with wheels on it. Don't, he said, before I got 2 steps in. I didn't say anything. You were fixing to make a face. I know that face. Your father had that face. I sat down. Camille was asleep in the corner chair, with her coat still on and her phone in her hand. Junie had drawn him a picture of a chicken and taped it to the rail, and somebody, a nurse I guess, had let her. He looked over at it. Number 4, he said. She got the comb right. She's got an eye. She's got your mouth, and Camille's stubbornness, and Bernice's ears. Poor thing. He wheezed a laugh, and it cost him. Wes. Yeah, that gate isn't hung. Arliss. Fence has been done 10 days. Every post, every rail, every picket. His eyes came around to mine, and there was nothing sick in them at all. And the gate isn't hung. I looked at the floor. Because he was right. I'd been dragging it out. On purpose. Same exact way he'd dragged out the fence. Pulling posts that were fine. Finding faults that weren't there. 2 grown men. Buying time with lumber. You've been stalling me since the day you called, I said. I have. Why? He let that sit. Machines beeping. Camille breathing in the corner. Hang the gate, he said. Sunday. And then sit down with me and I'll tell you why. Arliss. Sunday, Wesley. He closed his eyes. And don't you dare use screws in the joinery. I'll know. He came home the following Wednesday on oxygen, furious about the tubing, and told Odie in no uncertain terms that if she wound that cord around the porch rail one more time, he was going to walk into the woods and live there. She said, "Okay, Arliss." He said, "I mean it." She said, "I know you do," and wound it around the rail again. I built that gate in my shop over 2 nights. Black locust, same as the posts, mortise and tenon. No screws, no metal in the joinery. Every joint cut by hand and driven home with a mallet and a block of scrap. I've built a lot of gates. Hundreds. Some of them for people with more money than shade. That's the best thing I have ever made with my hands. And it always will be. And it took me 2 nights and 39 years to learn how. Sunday came in cold and bright. Frost on the grass. That hard blue November sky you only get in the mountains. Odie held the level. Junie handed me tools in the wrong order, with tremendous confidence. Camille stood on the porch with her arms crossed, chewing the inside of her cheek. I set the hinges, hung it, checked the swing, and then the door opened. Arliss Ketch came down off that porch 1 step at a time, pulling the oxygen cart behind him, and Camille moved to help him, and he lifted one hand without looking at her, and she stopped. He crossed that whole yard. It took him a long time. Nobody said a word. The only sounds were the wheels on the frozen grass and that old man breathing. He got to the gate. He put his hand on the top rail, and he swung it. Open, closed, open. The latch dropped with a sound like a coin going into a jar. "Latch is sweet," he said. "It ought to be." He didn't let go of that rail. He stood there looking out over Bernice's garden. Every bed dead for the winter. Every cane cut back. The whole half-acre fence true, for the first time in 40 years. "Everybody makes a fuss over fences," he said. I waited. "Fence is nothing, Wes. Fence is easy. Anybody in the world can keep a thing out." He swung it again. "Gate's the only part that matters." His voice had gone strange, thick. "Gate's the part that says you chose." Behind us, on the porch, Camille put her hand over her mouth. And then Arliss turned around, and he looked at me, and every bit of the meanness and the deflection and the 74 years of "don't make this weird" was gone out of his face. "Wesley," he said, "sit down a minute." "Arliss, I got a thing to tell you." He lowered himself onto the bench by the gate, slow, both hands on his knees. And I'd rather do it sitting. I looked back at the house. Odie was up on the porch now, laughing at something Junie said, wiping her hands on a dish towel, sunlight on her face. The old man followed my eyes, and what he said next put a hand around my throat. "Her daddy died in my arms," he said, "in the rain." 1971. The wind moved across that dead garden, and I have been lying to that girl for 2 years. Her name was Denise, he said. Denny. They called her Daddy. Corporal Denny Fairbank. 20 years old, out of Selma, Alabama. And he had a laugh like a car that wouldn't start. He was looking at the gate. Not at me. We shared a hooch 5 months. He kept a picture of a girl named Ruthie, taped inside his helmet liner, and he'd show it to anybody who slowed down enough to look. She was pregnant when he shipped. He didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. Mail took 3 weeks, and it never caught up. The oxygen hissed. Frost was melting off the grass in patches where the sun hit. Tuesday morning, raining so hard you couldn't hear the man next to you. He took a round through the chest, and I got both hands on it, and I pressed down so hard I cracked something in him, and it did not matter. It was never going to matter. I knew that in about 4 seconds, and I kept pressing anyway for 4 minutes. He stopped, breathed. It took him a while. He didn't say anything brave. People think they do. He said Ruthie's name twice, and then he said, "Check on my people." Arliss put his hand flat on his own knee. That's all. 4 words. He didn't ask me to avenge him, or write a speech, or carry his rifle home. Check on my people. And I said yes. And then he was gone. And I stayed there in the mud, holding a dead man for a while longer than I needed to. I couldn't move. I came home in April, he said. Married Bernice in September. Climbed poles for 31 years. Raised Camille. Buried my wife. He turned and looked at me. And I never checked on anybody. Arliss, don't. His voice went flat. Don't you do that. Don't hand me an excuse. I've had 51 years to build my own, and I built some good ones. He shook his head slowly. I couldn't write the letter. That's the truth. And it's not a good one. Every year I meant to. Every year I got the paper out. And every year the not writing got a little heavier. Until one day it stopped being something I hadn't done yet, and started being something I was. He tapped his chest. You carry a thing like that long enough, it stops being a weight. It becomes a bone. I asked him how he found her, and he laughed. A small, terrible, disbelieving laugh. Like the whole thing was still absurd to him after all these years. VFW dinner. Hendersonville, 2019. Pot roast and green beans and a woman 2 tables over talking about her mama. He shook his head. And she said her maiden name was Fairbank. And she said her daddy died in Vietnam before she was born. He had to stop again. I got up, he said. Wes, I got up out of that chair, and I walked outside into a parking lot, and I put both hands on the hood of a stranger's truck to keep from going down on the concrete. The wind came across the garden. Ruthie had a girl, he said, named her Odessa, called her Odie. And that girl grew up and became a nurse, and I stood in that parking lot for 20 minutes, and I could not make myself walk back in there and say the words. What words? He looked me dead in the face. I'm the man who was holding your father. I sat down on that frozen bench beside him, because my legs quit. So what did you do? What I always do, bitterly. I stayed close and I said nothing. He nodded toward the house. Found out where she worked, and then I got sick, which, I'll tell you honestly, was the most convenient thing that ever happened to me in my life. Requested her agency by name. Requested her. 2 years. 2 years. His hands were shaking now, and it wasn't the cold. That girl has driven me to Asheville and back 40-some times. 2 hours in a car every 3 weeks. She's helped me up steps. She's sat with me while they read me numbers off a chart that mean I'm dying. His voice broke clean in half. And I never told her. Not once. I sat next to Denny Fairbank's daughter for 2 years, with his last 4 words in my mouth, and I swallowed them every single time. I looked at that old man, 31 years in ice storms, hands like tree roots, and he was crying and not bothering to hide it. I'm a coward, Wesley. You're not. I am. I've been a brave man about 99 things and a coward about the only one that counted. He wiped his face with the flat of his hand. And then you started coming up in her conversation, and she started coming up in yours. And I thought, he stopped, steadied. I thought, well, here's one thing I can actually do. And there it was. The fence. The 42 rotted posts. The 9 days that took 6 weeks. Every Saturday he found a new stretch that had gone off true. The good post hole digger. The 2 cups of coffee. Every bit of it. You didn't need the fence fixed, I said. That fence needed fixing in 2011. You called me out here to hand her to me. I called you out here, he said, because I could not give that girl the truth. So I gave her the next best thing I had. He put his hand around my wrist, and that grip was still in there, under all of it. 40 years of copper and ice. Second drawer of the sideboard. There's a letter. Everything about her daddy. What he looked like. How he laughed. What he said. What he asked me to do. 51 years of it, and I finally wrote it down in October at that kitchen table with a pen I had to buy special because I couldn't find one that worked. His eyes came up. You give it to her after, not before. Arliss, you tell her yourself. You've got time. You can, after. Hard, final. I'm a coward, and I'd like to stay one right up until the end. Let me have it. I didn't answer. He squeezed my wrist until it hurt. And Wes, one more thing. Yeah, don't be careful with her. I looked up. Everybody thinks careful is a kindness, he said. It isn't. Careful is just slow leaving. He let go of my wrist. I was careful for 51 years. Look what it cost. He died in February. At home, in his own bed, in the room he'd shared with Bernice for 31 years, with the window cracked open because he could not stand a closed room. Camille was holding one hand. Odie was on the other side. 2 fingers on his wrist, counting. And I have never once, not for a single day since, believed that arrangement was an accident. That old man engineered every inch of the last 6 months of his life, and he engineered the end of it too, so that when he went, both of those women would be holding on to him at the same time. He didn't say anything at the end. He hadn't spoken in about a day. But Camille told me that maybe an hour before, he'd opened his eyes and looked past both of them, out the window, toward the back of the property, toward the garden, toward the gate. I gave her the letter 4 days later. We were on the porch. Gray afternoon, the kind that doesn't ever really get light. She'd been at that house all week doing the things nurses do when the patient is gone and the family can't function. The paperwork, the equipment pickup, the terrible small logistics of death. I took the envelope out of my coat. He asked me to give you this. What is it? I don't know all of it. That was a lie, and I said it anyway, because he'd earned that much. Odie, you should sit down. She read it standing up. I watched her face go through it. I watched the moment she hit her father's name. I watched her hand come up to her mouth and stay there. I watched her get to the part about the helmet liner and the picture of her mother taped inside it, and I watched her knees give a little, and I caught her elbow, and she didn't even notice. She read the whole thing without a sound. Then she read it again, and the second time, she read it out loud. To me, every word, from the top, in a voice that broke about 9 times, and kept going anyway. I asked her why. Because I've never heard his name said in a room with somebody else in it, she said. My whole life, 38 years, my mother couldn't say it, and I didn't have anyone to say it to. She folded that letter along the creases he'd made. He knew, she said. 2 years. He sat in my car for 2 years, and he knew. He couldn't. I know why. She pressed the letter flat against her chest with both hands. That's the part that's going to take me the rest of my life, Wes. He didn't stay quiet because he didn't care. He stayed quiet because he cared so much it paralyzed him. She looked up at me. He couldn't give me my father, so he gave me you. And then Odie Fairbank put her face against my chest and came apart, and I held on to her, out there on that porch until the light went. And past the yard, past the dead beds, that black locust gate stood in the gray, doing the only job a gate has ever had. We were married in October, on those 11 acres. In Bernice Ketch's garden, which Odie had spent an entire summer bringing back from the dead, with her bare, scarred, blackberry-torn hands. Tomatoes gone leggy, dahlias the size of dinner plates. Every raised bed she'd rebuilt herself with a hammer, and a lot of language. Junie stood up with us, 10 years old, furious about her shoes, absolutely radiant. Camille came, with Grant. She cried harder than anybody in that garden, including me, including the bride. And at the reception she stood up and made a toast that was 90% insults and about 10% the single kindest thing anybody has ever said about me in my life. And then she sat down and put her head on her husband's shoulder. There was a shorter way in. Everybody could have come around by the gravel drive. It would have been easier, and the ground was better, and 3 people told me so. I made every single guest walk the long way around and come in through that gate. Every one of them. 61 people. Put a hand on that top rail, swung it open, and heard that latch drop sweet. I never explained why. But when the last of them came through and it was just us standing there, Odie reached over and took my hand and squeezed it. She already knew. She's known since the day she read that letter out loud on the porch. That's the whole story. Except it isn't. Quite. We're on that porch most evenings now. Same porch. Same rail. Junie's 16 and has opinions about absolutely everything, including us, which she shares freely and without invitation. She's applying to schools that terrify me. The chickens are down to 4. One of them still has no name, only a number, and I am not the man who's going to change that. Odie left respite work 3 years ago. She teaches now, nursing students at the community college, and she is beloved and completely merciless. And every May a handful of them show up at our house with a cake and a card, and no idea that the woman grading them cried in a barn at 19 and quit. Inside our front door, there's a shadow box on the wall with 2 photographs in it. One is a 20-year-old corporal from Selma, Alabama, smiling into a camera in 1971 with his cap pushed back. The other is a 19-year-old from Cades Bend standing next to him, squinting into the sun, both of them alive, neither of them knowing. And out back, that fence still runs true. I walk it every spring. Reset a post here and there, tighten what's gone loose. That's what you do. Nobody thanks you for it, and that's not the point. But it's the gate I stop at. Every single time. Hand on the top rail. One swing. Standing there in the wet grass listening for that latch to drop. Anybody can keep a thing out. Gate's the part that says you chose. Yes, sir. Every day. So here's what I want to leave you with. And I want you to actually sit with it before you scroll away. Arliss Ketch was a brave man, about 99 things, and a coward, about the only one that counted. He carried 4 words for 51 years. Check on my people. And he could not make himself say the one sentence that would have set them down. So he built a fence instead. He built 6 weeks of Saturdays. He spent the last months of his own life engineering a way for love to happen in a room he was too afraid to walk into. And it worked. But he never got to see her read that letter. So my question for you is this. What is the one thing you've been carrying? The letter you haven't written, the call you haven't made, the 4 words stuck in your mouth that you keep telling yourself you'll do when you're finally ready. And who are you waiting on? Because I promise you it isn't them. It's you. It always was. Arliss ran out of time. You haven't. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And somebody down there needs to hear that they're not the only one carrying something. And if this story reached you, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so the next one finds you when it comes. Don't leave it to chance, because the whole point of this story is that the door only matters if somebody chooses to walk through it. Your turn.